Everyone, thanks for coming.
So I know there's some people out of town too that are listening in, but I'm sure you've seen some images online. But just to start generally, Tao, do you want to tell us a bit about this particular body of work and sort of your process of conceptualizing it?
I don't really know where to start because things kind of, I collected, ideas starting back in 2017, which is actually when I started Opus, which is the really big head in the exhibition. But I think, we spent like most of a year working towards this exhibition. And for me, it really started with color. When we began actually constructing the artworks in the show, I was feeling actually quite depleted. It was right after Art Basel Miami. It had been a really busy kind of lead up to that. And when I came home from that, it was sort of the dead of winter. I was feeling quite depressed. And color became sort of the center of what was keeping me very, I guess, grounded or like able to stay active in the studio. So yeah, I think this exhibition starts with color for me. That's where I found most of my comfort during the winter months. And I was also able to explore quite a bit and kind of pass beyond some of the boundaries that I was used to. As you know, I work with normally quite a muted, dark, more earthy palette. But I needed light, I think, in that moment when I started working towards this exhibition. And I needed just a sense of comfort. So the studio became draped in all of these, big pieces of hand-dyed things like bed sheets, curtains, tablecloths, really anything big that I could get my hands on from, the secondhand stores or what have you. So I'm not sure if that answers the question fully, but you were asking kind of like how this idea came about or how it started, I guess.
Yeah, like a lot of people actually that have come in to see the exhibition is interesting. A question that a lot of people have asked is about your process of making, and specifically how far in advance and with how much detail you'll plan or map out each series in advance.
Yeah. It's funny because the way that I work, there are some things in the studio that I started years ago, and I feel like it's not the right time to finish them. I don't like finishing artworks. I was just talking earlier about this to someone, but that's the part that I sort of dislike. Or I shouldn't say dislike, but having to title a piece takes a long time for me because that sort of signifies its completion. And I don't want things to be complete. I want things to, if I had it my way, I would work on them forever and they would just, be a part of my life forever. But for that reason, I often start things and finish them somewhere down the road. And for that reason, I also have, archives of different things such as fabrics, objects, seashells from different time periods that then kind of make their way through different strains into each body of work. So I can't really pinpoint when, a sculpture started all of the time because a component of that sculpture might have been something that I'd been hanging on to or had been hanging around for quite a long time. And that might have been sort of the seed that led me on that journey. So yeah, I think it depends on when you want to start the timeline. For me, the timeline doesn't start, with the physical construction. For me, the timeline starts with the moment that I found, the piece of fabric or what have you. So if you look at it this way, it's quite a lengthy process towards making this show. I started Opus in 2017 in Kingston, Ontario. And that actually had a big influence on the color palette in the exhibition, probably because I had a hard time finding a diverse range of colors and textures and patterns out there. As you might imagine, there's a lot of beige, a lot of pink. If I was lucky, you know, I could find like a cool yellow curtain or blanket or whatever. But it became like sort of a more like a softer palette than I would normally choose. But that's part of my work as well, is that, you know, the landscape within which I'm working has an influence on how things kind of unfold aesthetically. So yeah, did I answer the question?
Yeah, definitely. And so the work that you started in Kingston, were you dyeing materials at that time too in 2017?
No, I wasn't even interested in it. I think I've become more and more comfortable with the idea of like for example, painting. Or I guess just manipulating fabrics. Because I think originally when I started quilting, I was very concerned with leaving things be and letting the scraps kind of stay in whatever shape or form they existed in, and trying to sort of let them remain the way that I found them as a part of kind of creating a larger narrative or artwork with those things. But I'm coming more and more kind of interested in how I can expand the transformation of materials. So at that point, no, I was just working with things as they were. And I remember what I used, actually, the inside of Opus is several large pairs of like XXL pants, which when you split them open, they become like a nice sort of triangular shape, which lends itself well to the sort of dome structure of like the bottom of the head. Some blankets and some curtains, but no, I wasn't dyeing anything at that point. That sort of came later on when I felt more like experimenting.
Mm-hmm. And were you working on Opus like straight through since 2017, or it's what you said you kind of pick up and come back to it?
No, it slept for 2 years. Mm-hmm. Yeah. There was another one called Rover that we showed last year at Night Gallery. Right. That I was working on, but Opus slept for a couple years.
Mm-hmm. And in your, can you talk a bit about like why the materiality is so important to you? Like for instance, like the use of secondhand materials, but also just your process of collecting and, you know, even hand sewing, the sort of laborious nature of the way you work. I know there's a few reasons you do that. I think people would be interested in knowing about.
Yeah, so many reasons. Like, you know, for one, I find it interesting. I feel like I'm a treasure hunter. I feel like I've been doing that forever. I feel like that's been a part of my life since I was a childhood. You know, we would buy things from secondhand stores. We never bought things brand new. And that's always been something fun in my mind. I never, you know, it's always just been something more interesting and fun to me. I also, you know, I think a lot about access and times, I guess, in everybody's art career, where they maybe can't have exactly, you know, the paint that they want or the canvas that they want, or a certain material that like maybe is out of their budget in that moment. And I think that there are so many ways to kind of, you know, look outside of that. And within that limitation, I think you can exercise your brain to, you know, think of other ways to create art, or to source material rather. For what I do, there's such a surplus of, you know, textile waste, and it's everywhere. And I just think, why not use the things that are already there? I also, I think that like you and I have probably talked at length about the way that like materials become quite charged. An important part of the work for me is that I will often embed or sometimes hide or, just try and incorporate things that are my own personal belongings into the artwork. That often takes the form of clothing, sometimes jewelry. I wear jewelry and I often rotate these things. Sometimes I sacrifice them and give them to the artwork, stuff like that. But everything holds a charge, and it's no different than, if a painter holds a brush to the canvas, there's clearly a transference of energy that goes from the palm of their hand to the paintbrush to the paper of the canvas. When someone is sick, they say that you should put your palm, because that's where energy comes out of the most streamlined in your body. You should put it on their chest. And those things are all true. There's no reason for me to believe that they're not. And I think that objects, especially things that are lived with, and hopefully things that are loved, well loved by whoever lives with them, those things hold on to effective memories and emotional information, and those things all become part of the object or the vessel, part of the larger narrative. I really love kind of hearing the stories they have to tell, and I love that people find like quite familiar emotions when they spend time with the work, and I really think it's because of that. I think it's because of that sort of invisible energetic field that you can't maybe quite see or put your finger on, but it's definitely there.
Mm-hmm. And there's also something transformative in that act too. Like, you've used the term upcycling before. It is on the one hand so relevant that all these like pieces come together into like the material DNA of the work, but also that transformative process of repurposing and upcycling is really powerful. And I think you can really feel it in these works in particular. I mean, all of your works, but I think also with the dye and everything, it is even more visible and felt.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, for sure. I think that there's a reason why people react in different ways to different artworks, and that's something that's always been very clear for me. I know that I have a different relationship, obviously, to the things that I make because I spend a lot of time with them. In the studio, we work on the floor a lot. I'll be stretched out on top of the fabric, sometimes like inside of the fabric. I use those things as blankets if the studio is cold, stuff like that. So I think I have a very like intimate kind of relationship to the materials, but I still like to think it's something that can be like felt very heavily in a space, even to somebody who maybe wasn't there during the conception.
Yeah, I absolutely think that's true. I mean, you see it, I think, with every encounter of people coming into the gallery and seeing it for the first time, but also just connecting with it and looking at the nuances of the materials and recognizing those lives in it.
Mm-hmm.
And in your previous series, you were thinking more about the cosmos and creating portraits of ancestors who I guess in a sense were unknown, but you felt their presence. And I was wondering if that work, which you made last year, I guess, did this new work emerge from that, or are they related, or do you think of them as more separate?
No, nothing's separate to me. I think that everything is coming from more or less the same place. I'm still interested in the cosmos, for the same reasons that I'm interested in water, because it seems like a very kind of limitless, unbound territory, where I can just be really kind of free with whatever I want to imagine there. If we're talking about things that exist, you know, to us, that are in our wheelhouse of of geographies, you know, as humans. But yeah, I'm still kind of looking at the cosmos. The work definitely is, I think of it as, you know, a lineage where everything is inspired by or takes a piece from the last thing. Each body of work, either in its material or its ideas, is very much kind of drawn out from the last thing that I did. And I feel like what I'm trying to do is sort of, I guess, like unfurl this sci-fi chronicle that I want to build throughout my career. I don't want it to ever be done. And it's non-linear. It's not meant to be sort of chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3, but these are all explorations of the same bigger story, if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally. And then, but so the series that we have in the gallery right now, correct me if I'm wrong, it's the first time that you've sort of created a narrative where each, you know, person in this realm is connected to each other in a really specific way, like they function as an ecosystem. Is that true, that this is the first time you're sort of relating them to each other in that way?
It's the first time I'm relating them to each other in that way, while simultaneously giving the audience access to that relationship.
Mm-hmm.
Because I do think that I have a pretty like good understanding of the relationships between each work through every body of work.
Mm-hmm.
But I often, you know, I feel like I've given a lot of access with what I've chosen to kind of share in the exhibition text, which I kind of was like on the fence about. But then on the other hand, I was like, no, I think this would actually be quite fun in this moment. I wanted to really give gallery goers the opportunity to really just take a deep departure from everything. So I chose to be sort of more descriptive about what was going on in the exhibition for me. And yeah, there's definitely some, you know, relationships that I've drawn out within the show.
Could you actually talk about them a little bit for maybe people who haven't read the text?
Yeah. So as I mentioned before, the show for me is all about light. It's all about abundance. I was thinking a lot about, you know, feeling mothered, or wanting to feel mothered, wanting a sense of comfort. And with all of that, just wanting things to be right, you know, wanting things to feel right, just the comfort of knowing that things are okay, or they're going to be okay. All of those go sort of hand in hand for me. So I think of every figure in the exhibition, especially Symphony, sort of as a fairy godmother. One of my favorite movies is Cinderella, the animated one. And I watch it sometimes still, like as an adult, but I always cry in the part where fairy godmother comes down and starts transforming her dress after it got ripped to shreds in her carriage. And so what that symbolizes for me is just like, you know, just having to believe that things are okay and going to be all right. And you know, with all of the labor that was put into the work, I really feel like it gave more back to me. I feel so cared for by the figures that are in the exhibition, especially Symphony. So yeah, they come from this sort of realm that I named Taubi, which is an idea, but it's also an institution, it's also singular, and it's plural. This is a good example of how the whole show is sort of surrounded by love, but the name Taubi is actually a nickname of mine that was given to me by my friend Riley, who I lived with for 3 months and I felt extremely cared for. And whenever I hear that word, which Riley made up, it makes me feel that. It makes me feel, loved and cared for, and it reminds me of Riley and my time with Riley. And this whole exhibition is really just, in a lot of ways, inspired by people in my life who've, really taken care of me, and have the memories of those people have helped me kind of just move through. So these figures, they kind of are like the motherly overlords of the universe. They transmute into blossoms. All of the blossoms in the show actually represent, an entity or a soul. They each, are awake, and they have information inside of them, and they're listening, and they can hear you. And they also can transform, back into these really big figures. That's the idea. So they grow everywhere on every planet. And what they do is they collect intel, they offer advice, they offer foresight, and they store all of this information and spread it throughout their entire network of these growths, of these blossoms. And by doing that, they can kind of help to sort of navigate the moral compass of the universe. The root of it all is, the quest for justice, or the desire for justice. And so that's the kind of the realm that these figures exist in. Should I like pinpoint more kind of specific things about them, or?
Sure, that would be nice.
Okay, yeah. So it's mentioned in the exhibition that all of the figures are genderless. I want to think that I'm not sort of limiting anything in this world that I'm creating. But I also am trying to sort of think about the idea of motherhood, I guess, as separate from gender, and also gender is separate from sex. And that's why, femininity was really important for me to represent in this show. And I, think that a lot of things are sort of associated with femininity that are also associated with gender. But really, like, I felt while I was making these works that I was kind of creating a womb around myself that was just, covered in different colors of pink and purple and orange, and things that made me feel, like I was inside of a womb. So the figures are all related, but they're also all kind of unified. They're part of one system.
Thank you.
Sorry to like spout off a little bit.
No, I was hoping you would, actually, so don't apologize. So, I mean, a question coming out of what you just said too, I found it interesting in the text that you wrote, how you talked about morality and ethics. And you wrote, I took a quote out of it. You wrote, "Tasked with regulating the moral compass of the universe, souls inducted into the Taubi have lived lives to the fairest and most compassionate of their ability. Ascension to the Taubi after death is an institution bearing a resemblance to sainthood on earth." So I thought about that a lot, and I feel like I have like 10 questions about that, how you're cushioning that. I think it's really beautiful. So I was wondering, like, what made you think about sort of, morality and ethics in this narrative, and why it felt natural to approach that.
Because I think, you know, as life continues every day, of course this varies and it goes up and down, but there are times when it becomes incredibly difficult to believe in justice, or, you know, to believe in fairness, or that things are good, to believe that people are good. And I think, you know, it's just hard to, it's hard to continue believing in that every day, but I think that we do for the most part. I think that we have no choice. I think that that's, you know, why we continue. You know, life is chaotic. The idea of morality is chaotic. And I think in creating this narrative that kind of, you know, uses those ideas or tries to make some kind of order out of them, or some sort of system where things make sense. You know, the key is like beings that have lived lives to the fairest of their ability. That was really important for me, regardless of planetary designation or class or race. Those things are important to me. How do you measure someone's morality? You know, it's nearly impossible given the different circumstances that we all live in and come from. Those ideas are like very impossible for me to kind of organize in my head, you know, in the world that I live in. So I think for me, this was about putting some sort of system of organization into creating a just and moral and fair and safe kind of ethics. That was kind of at the root of it for me.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And the text that you, I guess I wanted to talk also about the text aspect of the work, because you mentioned you wrote a text, and also Eve B. Golden wrote a poem. And I was wondering what that process was. Like, did you collaborate on it, or was it something that was done independently?
Again, so part of the text was written by me. And then I decided that I wanted to collaborate with somebody else to help give a more kind of abstract and poetic element to the exhibition and to the work. And the first person I thought of was Eve, because again, this is somebody who's kind of helped me to feel comforted, and helped me to kind of, has, you know, had a very like mothering energy towards me when I've been struggling, and is also just one of the most like fascinating and interesting poets that I know, who I absolutely adore. I want to make these kind of collaborations more regular in my practice, and by that I mean people who are not necessarily identifying as, you know, visual artists, or just people from a diverse range of fields. I want to kind of open myself up to what I can learn from them, or how they can change or influence my ideas about art. So what happened was from very early on in its conception, I was sending photos of things like fabrics, flowers, you know, whatever was on its way to being realized in the studio, photos of these things to Eve. And then Eve just began writing, and we didn't have to have a ton of, you know, back and forth about what the poem was, because I just fell in love with their interpretation of, you know, what I was making. So.
And something also that stuck out to me, actually, this is something that I remember from in your process of making the works, being in your studio and and you were speaking about it, and the way you spoke about love really stuck out to me. And you said that the work was about triumphant love. And I sort of, the way I understood, I don't remember how you said it, but the way I understood it was, you know, thinking about a certain kind of nurturing love that can encourage a growth that exceeds boundaries, which I think you've touched on a lot of that already. But I was curious to hear you speak about love specifically and what it means here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think love is courage. Like, more than anything, I think love is courage. I think I've been saying to a lot of my friends recently that we really have to, you know, like, ease up on ourselves a bit, because I'm becoming more and more acutely aware of how much triumph it takes to continue. You know, and I hope this doesn't sound like too like dark or anything, but, you know, to get up in the morning, like, it takes so much triumph, it takes so much courage, especially in the state that we're in the world right now. And I think that, you know, at the same time that we're all working, that we're all living, we're all doing whatever it is that we need to do, there are all of these looming things in the atmosphere that just cause doom, like, just cause such, like, heavy feelings of doom, or at least I experience that in my heart. I oscillate between the two, you know, the feeling of being scared or having fear, or just being insecure, or, you know, just pushing through it and feeling a sense of hope, you know. So I think it's courage, and it's also continuation. You know, I've been thinking a lot about mamas and babies as well. This has been bleeding into a lot of the work. It inspires me, and it also kind of breaks my heart, and makes me want to cry, just thinking about the courage of bringing people into the world. And I remember having a talk with my dad. This must have been like a few years ago, but I think I was trying to tell him about global warming, and I was trying to explain some things to him. And I said something like, you know, isn't it so scary that so many people are having babies, and, you know, people just keep having babies. And I had all this, like, anxiety for some reason about the fact that people were still starting families, and, you know, not just, like, screaming and running into the streets. But he very calmly said, like, no, because people will always continue. Like, look what people have come through, you know, and look what we've come through. Look at what's happened, you know, post slavery and post, you know, colonialism, and through all this migration, and through all of this, you know, transport and travel. And people still continue. People still love. You know, people still. It's just part of being human. This was a difficult exhibition to make. It was, you know, I've moved quite a bit in the last 3 years, and especially, you know, during just, you know, from the start of quarantine till now, like, I probably moved like 7 times. It's been a really kind of distressing time in my life, and for me to get in there every day and continue working and having conversations with the work, that for me was, you know, choosing to, you know, to love, having love, instead of submitting to all of these feelings of doom that were kind of circling in my head around my life at that moment. So I hope that kind of.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, yeah, it's interesting to think about love as courageous, and I think that in my mind also, as you were talking about what your dad said, just thinking about healing also, and the fact that you've described the work as healing, and I think I mean, I know from seeing people interact with the works that they've felt the same thing being around it, especially, I think, especially in the context of this year. So I guess, yeah, I'm leading into a question also about healing then, and how the relationship between your approach to love and to healing is connected.
Yeah. Okay, well, for me, love and healing. Ask about love and healing. Okay, well, maybe
Talk about healing if you would.
Maybe I can synthesize that. I can synthesize that and talk about my experience with my work and my processes. Mm-hmm. So I think that what I'm doing through these labors and through also exploring these imaginary territories, to not leave or abandon, but I am taking a departure, and I think that departure is very radical. I wanted to offer a chance for people to also take a departure in coming into the exhibition. This is the same thing, when it comes to things like, the sewing for me, or just being, in studio in general, like work in general. Because what I get out of it happens in the studio. Looking at it in the exhibition space is not, it's not the climax for me. That happens for me when I'm alone in the studio with it, and that's part of my love, and that's part of my healing. Those labors, I think, are also, part of my healing and part of my departure, and part of my kind of recontextualizing of, a situation, or, a material or a piece of fabric. But yeah, I would like synthesize it to that for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to ask, I guess, a quite simple question, which I think it was the first question I asked you. You mentioned in your answer that naming the works is the last thing you do once they're present. And I love the names that you give your works, and so I was just wondering if you could, I don't know, just like talk about that process, even and even the sort of melancholy that comes with it, knowing that they're finished, I guess.
Mm-hmm. All right, so yeah, I think naming the work signifies its completion, which for me signifies its exit of the studio, which is which is the root of, why I love that part. But they have names that I give them, that I choose to address them with, that I often don't, that's not their official name. This is all part of part of my strategies towards keeping a level of access and intimacy with the work that is not just readily available to a gallery or a collector or what have you. But giving it an official name is really difficult, especially when there's a time that you have to do that by. And I don't like leaving things untitled either. Mm-hmm. But, this is why, often some of the works have really long drawn out titles, is because I can't choose. And so sometimes it's easier said in a poem or in a sentence rather than just one word. But yeah, I don't know, maybe I'll just stop titling things. I feel like there's some artists that change the title every year,
Yeah. I mean, you should do what you want to do, I think.
Yeah.
Okay, let me look at the chat. There was one question about your artistic influences. Someone asked if you were influenced by Zanelli Maholi, but I actually would like to make that broader also and just ask you who your artistic influences are. If you look to artists in terms of your practice, or is it elsewhere that you're looking?
Yeah, no, I do look to artists. I do like Zanelli Mahali's work a lot. I don't know, maybe I've never like pinpointed that connection, but like you never know where influence is coming from sometimes. I will say though that like for every body of work, but I think very specifically for this one, um, music is very important. I think I take a lot of influence actually from music. I've been like, so we listen to a lot of reggae, listen to a lot of punk music, we listen to a lot of electronic and techno. And I've been kind of studying the ways that these genres are actually very related to one another. And they're very kind of, there's like a reverb, I think, that really influences me and charges me and sort of helps, I guess, take hold like while I'm working. So music is very important, and truthfully, you know, when I'm working, I don't look at a lot of outside influences. I try and keep things very kind of, you know, insular in the studio. Um, yeah, I can like, yeah.
No, that's great. I actually didn't know that music was such a strong influence for you. So that's a good question.
Yeah, no, it's really important. I don't really know how people work without it. People that don't listen to any music.
Yeah.
Which I don't get, but yeah.
Well, I'm actually surprised. Oh, good. There is a question. Matthew.
Yeah.
He said, or Matthew, do you want to ask the question? Or not? No pressure.
Could you say a little bit about?
Okay. Yeah, you see it. Okay. Could you say a little bit about how you think about scale in your work? I'm thinking about how works like Spore or Baby Bumblebee function relative to the scale of Rover or the new works.
Yeah, I mean, like a lot of it depends on, again, like what is available in the studio and how much space I have to work with. So if I have a lot of space to work with, then I most likely will make something very big, or I will try to, or I will want to. Or my desire right now is to make large works. But you know, there have been many times where we've been working with, you know, dissected garments, things like leather jackets or pairs of jeans and stuff like that. And those smaller pieces of fabrics will lend themselves really beautifully to smaller works. There's also just, you know, times when I feel maybe more comforted by the more human scale, like if you will. But you know, I never really want to limit myself. I try to, you know, not let spaces that I'm exhibiting in dictate too much about the work or too much about the scale, but that is obviously, you know, a factor that I have to be realistic about. So yeah, it depends on a lot of things, but I never want to, you know, think of myself as limited in terms of what scale I'm working in. Yeah.
So do you think with the works in this exhibition, would you say that it had more to do with, you know, the availability of space and also having the resources, like in terms of material and that were sort of shifting you into that direction, or it was also a conceptual drive as well?
I had a really strong conviction to make the show exactly what it is. I've never been more close to the picture I had in my head becoming so much like its physical realization. And I really pushed it to make that happen. It was not easy getting my hands on things during quarantine, during lockdown when things were shut down. I really pushed it this time around to make things exactly kind of the scale that they're at, the variation of fabrics. Again, like getting creative, making my own colors, using acrylic paints to dye things, stuff like that. Because it could have been a lot less, but I was very committed to sort of making it everything that it is. So I pushed extra hard to do that.
Well, that's amazing to hear.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, if there aren't any more questions, I will, yes, there is a new question. How did you first begin bridging ways to share your work from your studio to a gallery and to larger exhibitions? And what advice would you offer to artists trying to get their work beyond their studio? And thank you for your openness. It's been great hearing more about your process.
Oh, that's nice. Thanks for the encouragement. I feel like I've been like talking like a crazy person.
No.
I actually get that question a lot from people, and I almost always give the same answer, but it should not be, I know this is going to be hard to hear, but it shouldn't be a concern. I know it's a concern. I know I had it as a concern, but like the most important thing is that you're working. The most important thing is that you continue to dedicate most of the time, within your practice to researching and doing the actual work. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with showing your work in your studio. I think that young artists need to reanalyze and reclaim, that they have a lot more freedom of who they give access to their art to, and how they exhibit their art. My friends and I put on, an art show at an abandoned gas station. We had art shows in our apartments. We had open studios in our studio. My first art show, like official solo show, was in somebody else's photo studio. There are so many ways to exhibit your artwork. You shouldn't feel limited or like there's more value in the white cube. I know that's, seems like weird things to say, but those shouldn't be considerations, while you're working. Those things will come, but you can put yourself out there, and you can invite people as well. Invite the galleries to your open studio. They'll probably come. Yeah, I don't know. Is that a good answer? I feel like
Yeah. There's two more questions, so we'll take those two and probably conclude. So the next one is, you spoke about mothering and comfort, and this makes me think about the future and bringing life into the world, like your conversation with your dad. Could you speak more about the way you see your work in relationship to the future and futurity? Or is your work supposed to bring comfort in the face of an uncertain future?
I don't know that the work is, I hope it brings comfort. I don't necessarily always align my work with the future. I think that I'm more kind of exploring allegories from the past, if anything. I like to think a lot about the past. I like to think about spirits. I like to think about ancestors. I like to think about talismans that are made from old things. Like, I'm very interested in I don't really always align my thoughts or my work with being future oriented. But
there's a science fiction element too, right? You said?
What's that?
There is like a science fiction element to the work you're producing.
Yeah, and I think science fiction is often immediately like kind of juxtaposed with like the future, like thinking about the future, talking about the future. But I think the real message with a lot of sci-fi, especially you know, reading Ursula K. Le Guin, is that it's about now. It's more about the current. It's more about like looking at the current through a different lens and the things that we are dealing with right now, as opposed to, you know, taking this more escapist route where we're dealing with things, you know, in a different time, like far away from now. I don't know if I answered the question. Was there another part to the question you were kind of asking about?
No, I think it was, you know, around futurity, but then, or is it about comfort in the face of an uncertain future? But
It's more about comfort, more about comfort. Mm-hmm.
And so the last question is about Opus. From Jordan, Opus seems in some ways to mark a return of sorts to an earlier interest in head portraits and the face, after it seems you have been working with a full figure. Oh, sorry, I lost my spot. More frequently. Opus reminds me of your smaller scale heads at the AGYU's Migrating the Margins exhibition, but with these newer, more colossal heads, there appears to be a real sense of joy and pleasure in the soft materials and fiber materials. So how do you see these newer, larger heads tie back to the earlier, harder material portraits? And do you approach the head face pieces differently than full body figures?
No, I don't really approach them very differently, aside from them just being, you know, at a drastically different scale. They're for the most part the same sort of construction. I know how to build the lips and build the nose and build the ears. It's all just on a much larger scale and from larger pieces of fabric. You know, I still think that those pieces that you refer to that are at the AGYU are, they're still related, but yeah, they are aesthetically very different. I guess if you're talking about the sort of canon of materials that go into those versus the strictly soft materials. But yeah, I do have a very strong interest in the face. I think the face is the first thing that I really learned or decided to learn how to construct, and not just with fabric, but also, you know, in carving plaster and things like that. And even before that, when I was, you know, doing castings of the face, and then I decided that I wanted to learn how to carve. I'm very interested in, I guess, just, you know, really figuring out how to perfect the contours and the muscular structure of the face, and how to do this in a variation of ways, and maybe in the future to even like rebuild the face so it's completely different. But first I have to master it the way it is now.
Great. Thank you so much, Tao. It was so nice talking to you about this work, and in general, always. And thank you everyone for joining us. It was really nice to see so many people here with us. Yeah, that's it. Thank you. Thank you. Have a good day.